So, at a time when many Nigerians, in spite of official attempts to stop them from protesting, went out to express their objection against bad governance and a cost of living crisis, and succeeded in commanding the government's attention, what now and what next? The heat that ignited those protests and gave manifest expression to the people's anger has created tinderbox conditions beneath this country's politics, with many activists promising to flock back onto the streets, but biding their time, waiting to see what the government will do in amelioration. A government many believe fears mortally the exercise of the right to protest, a right that it is supposed to defend but rarely protects and regularly encroaches upon. But protests there will be, because as one American politician once said, moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. So if the government fears the thunder that might rage across Nigeria if the protests return, and if it wants to keep the lid on that tinderbox, why not just fix the things the protesters are asking for and give the people a more robust economy, greater security, more accountable government, and a new, more representative constitution? I'll be joined in the studio by the lawyer and public policy analyst Daniel Buwala. And later, I'll also be joined in the studio by the human rights lawyer and good governance activist Deji Adeyanju. I'm Charles Enyegolu, and this is Arise Primetime. Now, after those 10 days of rage that erupted in the wake of mounting economic hardship in Nigeria, whatever happened to the voices that were raised in protest across this country calling for an end to hunger and bad governance? Clearly, not much has changed with the cost of living. It's still unbearably high, with food and fuel prices soaring and the currency, the naira, weakening by the day. For millions, the simple things, food, water, shelter, and medicines, are still unaffordable. And there is the perception that an egregious injury has been done by the reforms put in place by the Tinubu administration. But 11 days after Nigeria appeared to be on the edge of eruption, the voices of anger appear to have gone quiet, at least for now. However, the end bad governance message is still hanging wrathfully in the air, along with other things. Among other things, the demand to cut spending on government officials and, more radically, to scrap the 1999 Constitution. And it's all happening as the administration has been spending tens of millions of dollars buying new presidential jets, which have recently been impounded in France for alleged breach of contract. So how much has this left the Tinubu administration with a sense of profound unease about what might happen next with that all-consuming domestic rage? Or might anything not in fact happen in a country known for building things up and then letting it all end in an anticlimax? Well, later I'll be joined in the studio by the human rights lawyer and good governance activist Deji Adeyanju. But first, for his assessment of developments in Nigeria, I'm joined now in the studio by the lawyer and public policy analyst Daniel Buwala, who is a member of the UK's Honourable Society of Lincoln's Inn, one of the 4 inns of court in London to which barristers of England and Wales belong. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
What impact have these protests left?
You know, like we all know that protest is a constitutional right of people, and that is behind us. But I think that the lessons to learn are both sides, on the part of the protesters and on the part of government. But I think there's more to do with the protesters, because when they began this process, some of us we're advising that no matter what your objectives are, you should be able to have leadership to be able to negotiate. It's like trade union. And so the spirit of EndSARS haunted them, because they have this belief that once there are identified leadership, they are likely to be compromised by government. So they felt that a hydra-headed approach to it is one that will compel government to do that. But we all also know that because of the dynamics of Nigeria and of course the undemocratic elements who also have interest in this whole thing, we advise that if you go to a protest without a defined goal, the undemocratic elements are likely to seize it. And once they do that, then there's breakdown of law and order. Of course, section 45 to section 35 to 41 of your right will be abridged, because once there is a breach of peace, then any law that is reasonably justified can be applied. So the lesson to learn is that now the protest is over. Can they, in all honesty, identify those things they said they wanted to say? They can beat their chest and say there is a commitment on the part of government to do it. Definitely no. But in contrast, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, long before they went into the street, called on them to have a discussion with government, because some of the things that they were talking about, which of course trended in social media and mainstream, were understood by government, and government had already begun steps to addressing them. Like, for example, hunger, the release of truckloads of food, area of employment. Then there was this negotiation with the labor union, which they had the minimum wage, which is a baseline. Of course, it's renewable after a period of time. And then other things that they were demanding, which would take time, like certain reforms that would require constitutional amendment. Then, of course, others which are not within the precinct of the executive. For example, if you're asking for a reform that squarely falls on the jurisdiction of the National Assembly, you can, expect the federal executive, government to do that.
Yeah, but the federal government can lead the president goes to the National Assembly to ask for certain bills.
So if there was an organized, like we have always said, some of the characteristics of organized protests, that there will be identifiable leadership, identifiable objective, set time and deliverables.
And you don't think there was?
Some of these things were not there.
Well,
otherwise,
the reason I say that, and I apologize for interrupting you, is that the government always comes up with this issue of no identifiable leadership, but they always find the people to arrest.
So when there is a breakdown,
they go and arrest people who they perceive to be leaders.
So, for example, Deji Adeyanju, which will come to your show later, is somebody I know, but I have also watched on television. He distanced himself as one of the organizers. He's a lawyer to the protesters. You cannot call him
but he supports the cause. It doesn't mean he's an organizer.
But he said it with his mouth that he does not identify with them as leaders and organizers, but that he's a lawyer to the organizers. When someone says that, you cannot brush him as one of the organizers. So when all of them...
Yeah, but that's just Deji Adeyanju. What about the people who were arrested and so on, and arrested because they were perceived to be leaders?
It's not a perception. It must be based on intelligence. So, for example, if you're invited
in which case the government will have people to negotiate with if it wanted.
No, once there's a breakdown of law and order, you don't negotiate with crime. You negotiate. You see, there is a political capital, just like the Labour Congress. You strategize a timing in which you can hold the government by the jugular, and then make your demand. If you are not strategic, you see, strategy is the only cure to tragedy. Generally in life, in business, in everything we do, no matter how ferocious you think you are, if you don't have a good approach to issues, you will fall flat with your wisdom, with your knowledge, with your strength, and everything. And that's what the protesters like. Earlier, when I talked about the National Assembly, said federal government can bring a bill. You know that you can move your protest to the National Assembly on specific things that you want to reform. In the past, protesters did that. Then, of course, what about the states? We are all aware of the distribution formula of the increased allocation. We haven't seen any protests at the state level, and that's why some of us, when we began analyzing, we now felt that, well, there are a few handful of people who genuinely feel strongly about the country and they are protesting. Then there are those who don't know what they are protesting. They can move with whatever wave, but then there are undemocratic elements that want a platform to be created. Otherwise, Dr. Charles, how do you juxtapose individuals who on a normal day will not be able to identify a flag of a foreign country, identify the Russian flag, and we're producing it?
Yeah, well, that's a different kettle of fish. The point really here, Daniel, is that for a lot of the protesters, and you've identified many of them as having genuine intentions, and they were out there. I mean, you would have to say that majority of them were peacefully protesting. But the problem was that the government did not appear to want the protests to hold at all. I mean, we hosted many of them here.
So,
well before the protests began, they were coming up with all kinds of things, making presumptions about what was going, and predictions about what was going to happen, which made a lot of people suspicious. So to start saying, well, why can't you let the protests happen? And then let's see give the people protection.
Yeah,
that's what you're supposed to do.
Yes, of course, an irresponsible government will make that assumption that we will wait until when there is a happenstance before we can predict. But a democratic state has institutions like intelligence. If you have been on social media, you would have been seeing
the trending social media.
So trending stories as burning infrastructure of government, killing of individuals. These things circulated. You can say they are isolated. But how else will the government be able to? And what the federal government said, to the best of my knowledge, is that you have your reason to protest, but you have to also know that there are undemocratic elements that want to take advantage. On the part of the president, I know for a fact, and it has been covered by the media houses, he emphasized that no law enforcement personnel or official should stop protesters from protesting or brutalize them. That he said not less than once, twice, or three times. That's the position of government. And I think just before the protest, I was in the country, I met with the president. When I came back, part of what I was telling the people, based on my discussion with the president as a private citizen, his position is that it is the right of citizens to protest. But that he's saying, please, I beg you not to go into protest because I have heard you and I'm busy trying to address your concerns.
Yeah, but you're saying he's heard them. I mean, part of what he said he was going to do was to arrange for a dialogue.
Right.
We're not seeing, even if your argument is that there are no identifiable leaders, we're not seeing overtures on the part of the government to say that they are eagerly trying to work out a way that a dialogue can take place. You see what I mean? Even if they don't have, even if the particular protesters, groups of protesters don't have identifiable leaders, there are lots of pro-good governance people in this country who you could easily call and show publicly that you're actually engaging, and based on that discussion, put that to the Nigerian people. There are lots of ways that you can do it, but we're not seeing any attempt by the government to actually arrange any form of dialogue.
I know for the fact that the federal government tried its best by saying, if you are a leader or you're part of the people organizing, we plead that you do not go into the protest. Just come, let's have a conversation to know what your demands are. You will also hear from our side.
Yeah, but that sounds almost like you're threatening the
No.
when you say that kind of thing. They have a right to protest. They have a constitutional right to protest.
Which, as a government, you reiterated that, but then you also have a right to plead with them not to go into protest.
Yeah,
the reason they want to protest, let me tell you, sir, the reason they want to protest is because they feel unless that is done, the problem will not be addressed. Now, because probably the government isn't listening. The government wants to have a conversation. It's in trade dispute with Nigerian Labour Congress. They will say, we want to go on strike. And the government will say, before you go, let's have a conversation so you don't see the need to go on strike. It is the same spirit, intent later, and intention that the government is applying.
Well,
but I think that where some of these youngsters goofed is because they interpreted the request of the president for them to come forward for conversation as a weakness. So they doubled down on the threat of protest. And listen,
well, there are also some of them, I mean, we've spoken to them.
Yeah.
Some of them are also afraid of what is going to happen
I give you
in a country where the sledgehammer has often been used to suppress people who protest against government.
On the day
they fear that if they turn up and say, okay, we're the leaders, they'll just incarcerate them.
So, but that's an
unfair, to do it with some people.
That's an unfair demonstration of fear because
but do you agree that they did that with some people who at one point they thought were the leaders of the protest?
To the best of my knowledge, it was after the protest has commenced. But the reason why I want to keep using the name Deji Adeyanju because he will come to your show.
Well, Deji is here.
Yeah, I know. So
you.
that's why I am giving fact and presenting him as an example, he has the opportunity to debunk that. I watched on live television on the day of protest, Deji Adeyanju was together with some of his friends at the National Stadium. A police officer, high-ranking police officer, approached him and they were having a civil conversation. I watched how Deji that day was acknowledging the fact that the law enforcement officer is civil in his approach. Much more later, I read that things broke out and that there was blah, 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 blah. But
are you happy for us to bring Deji Adeyanju on while you're on? Sure. So we can all have this conversation?
Sure. I'm waiting.
Stay with us. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more to come. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Aniagolu. So at a time when many Nigerians, in spite of official attempts to stop them from protesting, went out to express their objection against bad governance and a cost of living crisis and succeeded in commanding the government's attention, what now and what next? The heat that ignited those protests and gave manifest expression to the people's anger has created tinderbox conditions beneath this country's politics, with many activists promising to flock back onto the streets, but biding their time, waiting to see what the government will do in amelioration. The government, many believe, fears mortally the exercise of the right to protest, a right that it is supposed to defend, but rarely protects and regularly encroaches upon. But protests there will be, because as one American politician once said, moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. So if the government fears the thunder that might rage across Nigeria if the protests return, and if it wants to keep the lid on that tinderbox, why not just fix the things the protesters are asking for and give the people a more robust economy, greater security, more accountable government, and a new, more representative constitution? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the lawyer, good governance advocate, and popular human rights activist, Deji Adeyanju. And I still have with me the lawyer and public policy analyst, Daniel Buala, who's a member of the UK's Honourable Society of Lincoln's Inn. And that's, of course, one of the 4 inns of court in London to which barristers of England and Wales belong. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And it really is nice to have 2 lawyers here, isn't it?
I'm happy to welcome him to the profession.
Yeah. And
a senior lawyer and a freshly minted lawyer.
Yeah, that's quite a combination, isn't it? But let me start with you, Deji. 10 days of rage, that's how it was described, and that's how long the protests lasted. What do you think they achieved, and what did they fail to achieve?
I think by and large we've achieved to reinforce the fundamental right to freedom of assembly in our country, and that Nigerians are not slaves in their country, and that we are not a conquered people, because it was almost appearing that Nigeria was an annex of the Bola Tinubu empire, and many of the traditional rulers who had gone to pay homage in the presidential villa, and also traditional religious leaders, and who were now trying to compel people not to protest. It was beginning to look like a monarchy. But on August 1st, 2024, we proved to the Nigerian people that we are not a conquered people, and that we do not cower in the face of intimidation, threats, and harassment. In fact, the security architecture in the country practically was threatening the entire nation that they must not protest. But we proved it. The protests did happen. The protests are not yet over. So people who are in government or supporters or sympathizers of government should not celebrate yet. Nigeria is like the Titanic. Nigeria is going through unimaginable turbulence. The only people who are having a good time are those who are in government, or sympathizers of those who are in government. If you look all around us, people are wearing different kinds of life jackets just to barely survive. Businesses are folding up daily. Even international businesses are exiting the country. When we, the protesters, we asked for rice. We never at any point asked for rice in the course of the good governance protest, but the government was sharing rice even before the protest, during the protest, and after the protest. We ask for an improved security architecture for the country, the government is sharing rice. We ask that they bring back subsidy, the government is sharing rice. We ask that they amend the constitution to have a people-oriented constitution. Because this particular constitution was written by the military. They just gathered together and wrote the constitution. We ask for a people-oriented constitution, they are sharing rice. The people ask for cheaper fuel and that the refineries in the country should work, they share rice. So rice sharing is not the solution to our economic, societal, and political problem. We ask for cutting costs of governance in the country. The president buys a new presidential jet. He launches it in grand style. He goes off to go and chill in France. So this government, they are insensitive. They are deaf and dumb. Even if protesters were to negotiate with the government on armed protesters across the country, they shot and killed them. That's the kind of government you want to negotiate with. The fears of the protesters that if they had a leader, that they will be targeted were justified during the protest, because even right here, I was right there in Eagle Square, and the police were attacking us on armed protesters. It took the intervention of even other security agencies to tell the police to stop attacking protesters right here. The police attacked journalists. Thank God your colleagues. I saw at least 3 of your colleagues from this media platform who were at the stadium when the police attacked us. So when people come and say that the protesters were not ready to negotiate, how can you say people are not ready to negotiate when the government is not making any attempt to meet any demands before the protesters? I was on this platform before the protest, and I said the president can still prevent this protest from even taking place in the first place. That the president can meet 1 or 2 of the demands of the protesters. And if the president does so, I even suggested that if the president brings back fuel subsidy, that he will be celebrated in this country. And that because there's already fuel subsidy, so the idea of saying that subsidy is gone is a scam, is a lie. That in fact, we pay triple what we used to pay for subsidy. In fact, this president should return us back to the subsidy regime of Buhari, which was better for the nation when a liter of fuel was selling for 167 naira. Now, no subsidy. We are paying almost 1 trillion naira per month. Under Buhari,
we almost 1,000.
Yes,
not 1 trillion.
Yeah. So
right.
Under Buhari, we were paying almost about 300 and something billion per month.
Right.
To cushion the effect of fuel subsidy. So
okay, you mean overall?
Overall
payment.
You
were talking about
overall payment. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, you set out your stall there. Let me give Daniel Bwala a chance. I mean, we see. I wonder how many bags of rice you might have got. Given that there's a lot of rice floating around the place.
I haven't got any, but let me tell you this. You see, my brother Deji, in his last words, contradicted himself. He said, we simply ask the president to bring back subsidy. In the same sentence, he said, in fact, they have not removed fuel subsidy. So you don't know which one.
Well, I mean, the least the government could do is acknowledge what the situation is and give the people a true picture of what is going on, and then they can make that assessment.
And this is what will work if there is an identifiable leadership. You see, you have to look at the protests and juxtapose that with the trade union, Nigerian Labour Congress.
Yeah, but I don't mean to interrupt you. The protesters are Nigerians. Mm-hmm. They're simply people who took the angst of Nigerians onto the streets. But the president still owes it to the Nigerian people, right, irrespective of whether he speaks to the protesters or not.
Yes, which is what the president was doing consistently in the days leading to the protests. And secondly, the protest, if it were a spontaneous protest, you would say there would have been no need for identifiable leadership because it's spontaneous. This was a well-planned and organized protest. Certain individuals gave a date, produced demands, shared it, gave timelines, talk about where to meet, and that there are human beings planning it. The government said, can you come, let's have a talk. Unfortunately for them and to their disadvantage, they refused to come up. So after they exhausted the 10 days now, there is nothing they can point at and say, we're going to hold government responsible on A, B, and C. And my point is, if they had secured representation, where you come to the president and say it. You see, the idea of coming to meet with the government is so the government who can tell you from what you are demanding, what can be, what cannot be, what requires time, and you can have an understanding.
That's a good point. But in fairness to the protesters, it's not as if the government said, just to say, we will dialogue with you. The president didn't say, this is the person who's been appointed to lead the discussion. In other words, he's holding the protesters to account, or you are, saying, well, you don't have any leaders. But the government didn't say, well, here are the people we want you to negotiate with. So go and approach those people.
No, because that's the wrong way to do it. You see, there is a government. Nigeria is a government.
Has a government.
And Nigeria has a government.
Yeah.
Identified leadership in the president. And he has cabinet members. So there is an identified government. It is when they bring their demands and they ask you, get your leadership.
Well, they brought their demands.
Yes, so that what I'm saying is the demand is in the social media. You say, identify your leaders as survey talk. So let's assume, I'm giving an assumption. Deji Adeyanju and a few others now said, okay, we are leaders and these are our demands. We want to speak with the government. You will come to the president or any official of government. The president will now set up a committee or team. The same thing with the Nigerian Labour Congress. And then the people with the team will sit down and have a talk. Now,
well, it's a chicken and an egg situation.
Yeah,
I mean, the government could have done its part and left these people to do theirs.
Well,
but let me bring you, to interrupt. Let me bring you in, Deji. I wonder if you'd like to respond to the things he said.
Yes, so basically this is not the first time protesters are protesting and having demands. The demands of the protesters during NSAS was not met. While NSAS was going on, key leaders of the NSAS movement met with government, but nothing was done. You know, do you meet a government that is not willing, not ready to negotiate? You know, that because look at the amount of resource that was put into stopping this protest. Imagine we just put that energy into fixing the country. Look at, we never knew until the End Bad Governance protest that we have this amount of security mobilization in the country. That means we can actually tackle the insecurity problem in the country if we want. It simply means some people in somewhere do not want the insecurity problem in the country to be solved. Because here in the FCT, the police said they deployed over 4,000 something officers. Imagine what 4,000 officers will do in Zamfara, Sokoto and Kebbi. It will have prevented the emir who was just killed in Sokoto from being killed. You know, an emir was abducted, displayed by bandits, killed, an announcement was made by bandits in a country that has government. In this same country, protesters, 1,400 protesters have been arrested by the protester in chief, who has always been protesting, who is a chief critic of others. These are people who call a sitting president kindergarten president and all sorts of names. And nobody had any issue with them. Why? It's now their turn to receive criticism and to receive protests. All of a sudden, protesters now must meet government. Protesters now must have an identified leader. Protesters now must assemble at a particular venue.
In fairness, Deji, I mean, you know, in fairness to what Daniel Buwala was saying, you don't just say something and then the government will just say, okay, we'll do it. You see what I mean? I mean, there has to be a process of explaining to you what the pros and cons are of the demands that you're making, because they are the ones who are controlling government. What about gesture? I mean, the president did make gestures, let's face it. I mean, he came out, he spoke to the people, he said he was willing to engage with the people. What about the gestures that have been made? Like, for example, we heard recently that the National Assembly said they're going to reduce their salary for 6 months. President Tinubu recently told his chief of staff to ensure that the cost of governance is cut by slashing the size of his entourage on foreign and domestic trips, as well as those of the vice president, the first lady, and ministers. That's a cost of governance reduction measure, isn't it? That suggests some measure of goodwill on the part of the government.
For us, from where we are standing, we do not see any sign of goodwill from the president. The most brazen of lack of any care for the Nigerian people is the presidential jet that he just launched. 150, whopping 150
I have to admit,
billion.
that's a difficult one to justify. But I'll come to you on that.
Whopping 150 billion. The jet that he replaced is still almost a new jet. In the US presidential jet is almost 50 years old. The British Prime Minister was still flying commercial of recent. Look at, even when it comes to cost of governance, the US president, everything he eats in the White House, he pays for it. If he orders any fish, he pays. Anything.
It's not like you like fish.
No. I'm speaking to the heart of cutting costs.
Right, I
in
understand
governance.
what you mean.
And so, look at the convoy of the president. The day the president was going to France, I was coming from Lagos.
Yeah, but he just said that he wants to cut.
The day that the president was going to France, I was coming from Lagos. My Dr. Charles, you will not believe the convoy of the president is enough to get the president impeached if things were working in this country, sincerely speaking. And additionally, it's important to note that the demands of the protesters were not hatched in a room. Government knows the demands of the protesters. These are popular demands. They resonate with the Nigerian people. The economy is hurting because we have floated out the naira. The economy is hurting. We know that for a fact, Nigeria is dependent on petrol. And the protesters have explained why reverting to the old price of fuel will help the economy. Because what the president thinks he's saving the nation, but he's actually subsidizing the governors. The president is subsidizing himself and politics. Okay, you don't want to subsidize the poor. You don't want to subsidize. When you subsidize the poor, you are subsidizing the economy. But you want to subsidize Akpabio. The other day I was in Lagos, I saw the cover of Akpabio, Godswill Akpabio, the Senate president, who said we should go out and be protesting. He will be in his house eating. For him, it's always about eating. The most important thing and most relevant thing for me as a citizen is that when this president came on board May 29, 2023 last year, the president was clear, he was emphatic. He said, dear citizens of Nigeria, who are my citizens? I'm appealing to you that you should all make sacrifices for this country. Have Nigerians not made sacrifices in the last 1 year? Have Nigerians not tried? Nigerians can barely breathe. And when this president won the election, he said, let the poor breathe. But he's practically suffocating the life out of citizens daily. This new jet, Dr. Charles, I was at the airport. It's one of the...
I'm not a doctor, by the way. You can just call me. You can just call me Charles.
Charles, you know, let me tell you, that jet is a passenger plane that can comfortably take 250 passengers. I saw the plane myself. The president does not need that kind of luxury. He doesn't. Because Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world. Nigeria cannot afford that luxury. We just took a loan from IMF, for God's sake. Our leaders are behaving like bandits. They are extremely insensitive.
Okay, let me bring you in, Daniel. Thank you for your patience there. I mean, to be fair to you, because we have to try and balance this. I mean, I think Deji has made a lot of very good points and points that touch the hearts of the people of Nigerians. I mean, that's a fact. Nobody can deny that. But to be fair to the presidency and the government, the president, a lot of the money that has accrued from the removal of subsidy, state and local governments have seen more revenue accruing to them as a result of that removal. You have made this point several times that people should be holding their state governments and their local governments to account. Would you care to buttress that point?
This is why I believe that it bears repeating that the protesters are just moved by the waves and utopic euphoria. If it is an organized protest, it must have objectives. You want to deal with hunger, you want to deal with unemployment, you want primary health care. There are some of these things. Now, Deji is a lawyer, so he must know this. If you look at the Constitution, there are matters that are within the exclusive list. They are responsibilities of the federal government. There are matters that are in the concurrent, means there's a joint responsibility, the federal government and the state. Most of what the protesters were protesting are matters that are within the precincts of the concurrent but they fall squarely at the state level. We practice a federal system of government. That was what brought about the issue of increased allocation. So state and local government are getting nearly half of what the federal government, that is in totality of the revenue, gets. And a better and organized protest will be one that will be channeled towards the state and the governors, because since the increased allocation and the more revenues coming to the state, don't forget that these allocations are not the only revenues in the state. There is IGR and there are local and international loans. So they are not looking at the governors. Fundamentally, our democracies rest squarely at the local level. So that's why we feel
they're technically in charge of most of the development.
Exactly.
Really.
As a matter of fact, 70% of what affects the president is still influenced by the governors. I've been saying that in terms of his ministers. Most of the time, governors nominate them, the ambassadors, the MDAs, federal high court judges, state legislature. They are in charge of everything. Do you know the truckloads of food that were released to them? They refused to share it prior to the protest, just because there was achievement of the local government autonomy, which they were not comfortable about, just as to punish the president. I will appeal to Deji and the people he advised to tell them to be more serious about protests if the substance are the issues that they care about, which is dealing with poverty, unemployment, and the rest. Yes, so they have to look beyond the idea of gathering in the street, pointing at the president, gathering on the street, pointing at the president on matters that
in other words, it has to be moved to the next level.
Yes,
what you're saying,
to the state
for
governors.
it to have to be effective,
and then to show good faith and lack of ill motive.
Well, what's your reaction?
Then let me say this before we
yeah.
get to him. I'm sorry, sir. If they don't change strategy, 100 protests of this nature will not achieve anything. We have to be, that's why they call it organized labor. So the protest has to be organized protest in order to achieve that.
Well,
it's not about, you see, it's easy to do catchphrase.
Evidence does not support the point you're making.
No, what I'm saying is,
even though we're not calling for anarchy by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, we've seen ample evidence across the world.
This is the most successful protest, but this is the most successful protest in which the law enforcement minimize risk by showing restraint.
Right. Anyway, let me come to you, and let me just say this before I come to you. I mean, people are seeing you now as a sort of unofficial spokesman of the Tinubu government, and people are seeing you, Deji. Yes. They're calling you Deji. They are the rebel in chief.
Well, Charles,
in Nigeria.
Unfortunately, Dan is now a spokesperson for the Tinubu government. And also,
well, he has a right to support whoever he wants.
Of course,
just as you do.
The president has a spokesperson, and you know I'm not.
It's a constitutional right. Now, speaking to the issues that he has raised, number one, why should the president continue to subsidize governors who practically loot our money? This is one of the issues we're raising. That it's better to give the money direct to the people, direct to the economy, than to give to the governors. In the last 1 year, the money that was saved from subsidy, what have the governors done with it? Nothing, practically nothing.
But the president has the constitutional right to withhold.
So now the issue that we are discussing is that if you subsidize, you are taking the money that every nation in the world subsidizes products and services for their people.
Yeah.
Some nations even subsidize walnuts for their citizens. So subsidizing for the economy, you are trying to save the economy, because we are dealing with extreme inflation. So when you subsidize for the economy, you are improving the welfare of everyone, not the welfare of the governors who receives the FAQ, and they change the naira to dollar and put more pressure on the dollar. Do you understand? So you are subsidizing for the whole country. So that is number one. The president needs to put the interests of Nigerians above politics, because if he's thinking about second term, he will continue to subsidize for the governors. That's addressing that first issue. On the second issues, is it not ironic that majority of our problems in this country is tied to corruption, but the EFCC that should have the maximum support of every citizen of this country does not have it? Because if we fix corruption, I will give you a simple example with Yahya Bello, who is currently
the former governor of Kogi State,
who is currently above the law, who no longer has immunity or enjoys immunity. Yahya Bello is free, walking the street, but protesters have been arrested here in Abuja and in other parts of the country, and they've spent 2 weeks in custody for protesting. Their only crime is that they protested.
Yeah, it sounds like a travesty.
Yes, in Katsina, sir, in Katsina, protesters were arrested. They gave them summary trial in a police station. Then an adjournment was given for a month's time. So that means those protesters will be in custody for 1 month for protesting. But Yabelo walks free. Now you want to talk about issue of equity, because the idea of rule of law, that rule of law must be exercised impartially, and it must have general application. The derogations from fundamental rights enshrined in Chapter 4 of our Constitution, they are very clear. The circumstances for derogation, none of those circumstances is present as regards to the case of Yabelo. Now, why is EFCC not getting the support that it deserves? For instance, let me tell you something. People say, oh, Yabelo is above the law. No, he's not. It is the president that is shielding Yabelo, because there is no way that a man will be alleged of stealing 80 billion. The EFCC has gone to court. The EFCC has a warrant for his arrest. They say EFCC attempted to arrest him. He evaded arrest. In fact, the EFCC can go to government houses if they suspect that a governor has changed federal location that he has gotten, and he has transferred to dollar, and he has stockpiled in government house, because that's what majority of them do with the money that Tinubu is saving from first subsidy. That's what they do, majority of the government houses. And the EFCC can go to the government house and confiscate the money. The immunity that the Constitution envisages is for the individual and the person of the governor. The stolen funds and looted resources do not have immunity.
Although there's a question mark, because when you haven't found someone, you haven't proven, I mean, to the point of, I mean, ineluctable, unquestioning doubt that the money is actually stolen,
the security agencies,
then it might be difficult to actually go there.
No, our laws are very clear on anti-money laundering. Our laws are very clear. If you are in possession of X amount of money as an individual, you'll be liable for money laundering. If you are in X amount of money, just for exceptional circumstances, thank God that Dan is a lawyer. He knows. For instance, you can say, oh, I'm a lawyer, you're exempted from the Anti-Money Laundering Act because, oh, client's money is in my custody, I can explain. Because the act says you must explain the source.
Right.
If a governor is found with $50 million in government house, the EFCC should confiscate the money, let him come and explain how
well, they can get a court order.
Exactly, that's what we're saying.
And impound the money until the thing is done. But we must give him a chance to
yes,
I was
just about to round up. Furthermore, look at the Hajj Commission chairman accused of stealing 80 billion naira. 80 billion naira. In a nation that strives at hygiene, by now he will be arraigned in court. By now. Because the greatest way to show protesters that, yes, government is making efforts, government is trying to assuage their feeling, is that the president should not be getting on that jet.
Yeah. The optics.
The optics matter. Yeah. They matter. So now let me concede to Daniel.
Okay, Daniel, please.
I'm not aware that Yabelo is roaming in the street as he has said, because I'm aware that Yabelo has been declared wanted by law enforcement.
And that he's in hiding somewhere.
And that he's in hiding.
Right.
I'm also not aware that monies have been identified in any government house, because if they exist, this is part of the things I talk about. Protesters have to be organized. You launch your protest around that level. The government or the law enforcement will have no option but to do that. With respect to the subsidy, the federal government has been subsidizing actually. Prescription drugs, subsidizing in agriculture. You see a lot of areas subsidizing in transportation. In the FCT, since the launch of the rail system, you say from here till December, they are not going to be collecting money from people. Then there are many other areas the federal government is looking to subsidize, and that's the belief of the president, that fuel subsidy benefits cabal and rackets.
What are they subsidizing exactly in agriculture? Because we've heard a lot of farmers complaining about fertilizer,
They give them for seed, they give them fertilizer.
They're saying that fertilizer used to cost 15,000 naira.
Yeah.
Now it's costing 50-something thousand, and they're not seeing the subsidy.
That's the subsidy of fraud that we're talking about.
Where is the subsidy?
There are subsidized fertilizers in the same way that you saw the other time when federal government said 50 kg of rice should be sold for 40,000 to Nigerians. It's like that. There are subsidies. Now, I expect that protesters and those who do investigative journalism to go and then find out whether these things don't exist. And then if they don't, then they can bring it to the fore.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying to you, that we've heard from farmers who have said that they're not seeing the subsidy. That they're paying a certain amount of money, which is a market rate.
Yes, in fact, recently Al Jazeera did an exclusive with us, did an exclusive with the farmer. The farmer said, just last year, fertilizer was 15,000, 15,000. Now fertilizer is 54,000, 53,000, depending on where
he's
you're buying
airing
from.
Something that has been aired previously.
Exactly.
That is the common.
Yeah, exactly. That's
let me say something. So this is what we welcome.
Yeah.
This is what government welcomes. Citizenship engagement.
He's in government then.
No,
he's in government.
All of us are government.
No, I'm not in government.
You are not in government. You are not a Nigerian citizen.
No, I'm not in government. I'm a citizen of Nigeria. I'm feeling the pinch as much as.
Who isn't feeling the pinch?
I'm feeling the pinch as much as the cameraman. I believe me.
Let me answer. You haven't allowed me to answer the question.
If this president returns fuel back to 167 naira as he met it a year ago, believe me, I'll issue a statement commending him.
Okay. Let Daniel, we've got 2 minutes left.
Yes.
You've got a minute, and then we'll give him a minute.
So it is easy to say we want the federal government to restore the sale of the fuel to 150. But we expect a more diligent discussion along that line to talk about the facts behind it. That if the government is going to bring back subsidy, where will the government secure the $2 billion monthly to back up the naira and then to subsidize? These are facts. For the government to do that, the government must generate $22 billion annually. The government doesn't do that. And the other way to deal with that is for the government to increase the output production of oil to 3.2 million. For the federal government to be able to generate that output, the federal government will have to invest 50 billion to generate the output. Now,
very quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So because
10 seconds.
When people say return the subsidy without bringing to the Nigerian people facts along that, it is easy to use catchphrase, rhymes, and popular.
But the government isn't giving people those facts.
The president said that.
Final word.
He said the government. Where would the government see the money? Where did the government see the 150 billion to buy the jet?
Yeah, that's
where did the government see the money to buy all the brand new jeeps? More than 1,000 jeeps. 2024 jeeps. Where did the government see the money? Where did the government see the money to fund all? Yesterday I was in Lagos, or 2 days ago. I saw Akpabio driving. He first came in a convoy. He passed my Uber. Then he went into the presidential wing.
You seem to have an issue with Akpabio.
Yes, he went into the presidential wing, and before our flight took off, I saw him flying one of the presidential jets.
Well, just round off very quickly. What's the point?
So the point is, the government cannot find money to subsidize,
and yet they can find money to
spend on
themselves.
Yes, the government can find money to fund the expensive lifestyle
and the government
of the president.
Found money and
also the government can find money to also fund the extravagant lifestyle of politicians
on
a daily basis.
Gentlemen, this discussion, and I appreciate both of you very much. You were very civil in your discussions, and I think a lot of people would have learned a lot from listening to both of you. Thank you very much indeed. Deji Adeyanju is a lawyer, good governance advocate, and human rights activist. And of course, Daniel Bwala is a lawyer, public policy analyst, member of the UK's Honourable Society of Lincoln's Inn. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye, and thank you for all.